Good afternoon, everybody. This is Pat Malloy. We'd like to welcome you to our Assessment and Accountability Technical Assistance call. We try to do these calls monthly during the school year to discuss ongoing and upcoming assessment and accountability tasks. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping items. First, we're recording this call. We'll provide the link to the recording and the presentation after the meeting. Second, please mute yourself if you haven't already. And third, if you have a question or comment, please feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat. In case there's a few new individuals joining us, we are the Accountability and Assessment Team for SPCSA. We help schools meet deadlines and submit accurate data. As to our team members, Selchuk Ozdemar is the supervisor for our team. He oversees all of the academic performance activities. Brandon Gaitan is the coordinator for all of the assessment and accountability activities, while I assist the team in these activities. The agenda for today will be on the ongoing upcoming assessment and accountability tasks, breaking it down by the assessments, giving some general information, test security training, user accounts, touching on WIDA, Smarter Science, ACT, and then in other assessments, accountability, the Nevada report card data submissions, the CTE work-based learning, and what we know about the 21-22 school year NSPF. Generally, for the assessments, participation will be measured this year by the NDE. Federal law requires 95% participation school-wide and 95% participation for each student group in math and ELA. Not meeting these participation requirements can lead to consequences under the NSPF. The warning is for the first year, point penalty in the second consecutive year. This year, per NDE, the calculations are being reset, so there will only be warnings to the schools that do not meet participation. For the next couple of slides, I'm just going to skim over them as we've talked about them in previous technical assistance calls regarding the assessments and test security training. Anyone administering the state must follow the points indicated here on the slide and will be provided to you later for reinforcement. And anyone administering state assessments who's authorized to view the test content or they must additionally meet certain criteria, and it's listed there. And the same thing for this next slide goes into detail about the test security training and what is required. And it also talks about test irregularities. And on the next slide, it talks about user accounts. If anyone needs access, please reach out to our office and we'll be happy to give you access as we manage the DRC user accounts. And with that, I'll turn that over to Brandon. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. So now we're going to talk about some specific assessments. As I'm sure you're all aware, we have posted the final WIDA data from last year's administration, the 2020-21 data, both WIDA results and the WIDA growth. You can use those data to exit students if they passed. Please use an exit date per the NDE of the last day of your 2021 school year if they did in fact pass. And then we also posted updated NSPF data from last year. I know, again, we're almost through the cycle and this is very late, but it is there. They did include WIDA growth as well in the last year's NSPF data. We posted files for you to Bighorn in March. So as far as the WIDA administration for this year, the one that just happened in January and February, 21-22 administration, those data have gone through the pre-reporting data validation. And I know a lot of you were working hard on that, so thank you for that. There are some following steps that still remain per the calendar that you could find at that link. So in about 8 days, districts should receive reports online with WIDA results for this year. And then you should receive student reports printed in the mail in late May. And after that, there will be a window from May 23rd to May 31 for post-reporting data validation. So we did the pre-reporting, so that's supposed to be before the student reports go out, kind of like make last-minute fixes, etc. And this post-reporting data validation is just one more opportunity to make any fixes that you may see. So if you get a student report, maybe you get two student reports for the same student and the scores are split across two reports. That would mean the student record didn't merge correctly in the WIDA system, and you might need to make a few fixes to make it all match. We'll talk about that more when it comes up, and if you see anything like that, feel free to contact us. But there will be that one last window to fix everything before the final data go to the state. And that is another opportunity to make changes related to YIS and YID, which are the indicators NDE uses to make sure to count students or not count students in the star rating system. And you want to make sure you count the right students. And then finally, the final data will be posted in WIDA AMS on 6/14. And then the NDE will take those results and they will clean them up on their end and also calculate WIDA growth. And those should be available in July, I would imagine, based on prior years that we've seen that. For WIDA Screener, we've talked about this previously, so we'll just skim over this, but there are some points here about the WIDA Screener, when to administer it, and if there's any uncertainty about EL status, just go ahead and screen. And one thing, we've had a few questions recently about scoring. So there are certain portions of the WIDA Screener that one can score if they have been trained. And we've noticed that some accounts that were set up years ago might not have the scoring privileges. So if you run into any of those issues, let us know. It usually gives you an error message saying your district test coordinator needs to add permissions. So if that happens, let us know. Okay, probably the big one right now for all of you, the Smarter Science and NAA testing. So I'm sure you're all aware the test window runs about another month until May 18th. We've had a few questions about when can you test? Can you test outside of your school window, your grade test window? Yes, you can test whenever you want, as long as it's within the state window. And if it's in the state window, then it will be returned in the state results file, and it will count for all the reporting that NDE does, report card, star ratings, etc. We've also had questions about when the DRC test system is open. So typically it is open 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. That's what we've been advised. But I just got a memo today from DRC saying they've extended the hours for now, as of today, until the end of the test window. And now it will be open 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time, Monday to Friday, during the test window. So that obviously means you cannot test on weekends. We've had some questions about students that may not want to come in during the week because they're fully virtual and there are concerns. Can they come in on the weekend? Unfortunately not, but there is some time potentially after school during the week up till 7 p.m. Pacific that you can use that in-site testing system. As a reminder, there are DRC trainings available if you're new to administering assessments. As Pat mentioned, there are prior slides on that. Another reminder about the types of tests that are within Smarter and Science. Specifically, there's the CAT, the Computer Adaptive Test. This can be completed over multiple days, while there are performance tasks that need to be finished in one day by students. Otherwise, they lock overnight. So as you can imagine, and as you've probably all experienced, there can be issues with the test locking. And then that brings us into our next point. If you experience a test irregularity, such as test locking, please contact us. We may be able to unlock tests depending on circumstances. Here's a non-exhaustive list of examples that we've already encountered this year and in years prior. So maybe a student becomes sick during testing. There's a technology malfunction, such as the school-wide internet going down, or maybe a computer crashes and the test is finished when it wasn't really finished by the student. A student accidentally submits a test without completing it. A student accidentally logs into the wrong test, maybe the prior day, they didn't follow directions, and they logged into the test and they came back the next day and it's locked. If a student was using electronic device, such as a phone, or a student was cheating, a student started testing without accommodations, those are all test irregularities where you will have to submit a test irregularity form just for reporting purposes. So please contact us. We can send you the link, and we can also figure out what can be done about the situation. Like I said, there are times where we can unlock tests. Generally, that's if something is accidental, if something is caught very early, if a student is sick. Those are all situations where we can generally unlock tests. But if a student does not submit their test and it's been days, maybe they finished the test but didn't click submit. If it's been days, we can't really, the guidance has been not to unlock tests. So it can get really confusing depending on the situation. So the best thing to do is contact us. We will use our prior guidance from the NDE and also talk to NDE if needed to figure out what we need to do. Here are some other points on the Smarter Science NA based on the questions we have been getting recently. There have been a bunch of questions about adding students, missing students to your DRC rosters. So for example, a student transferred to your school in February or March, and they're not on the roster that was preloaded to DRC system. You can use the add student function on the DRC student management page. You probably will get if the student came from another district, for example, Clark County, and went to a charter school in Las Vegas area, you might get an error like SUID already exists in the system. You can contact DRC at the phone number there or the email there, and you can ask them to transfer the student to your school over the phone. That's what I would recommend. Sometimes they'll try to tell you that you should do a file upload. That's just them trying to pass it off, and it gets complicated with the file upload. There might be errors. If you do a file upload, the student test sessions might not get transferred, so they might still be in test sessions in Clark County. And then you still have to call DRC anyway. So I would highly recommend just calling DRC, tell them you want to do it over the phone, especially if you have just a handful of students. If you have, tens of 20 students, maybe we need to figure out another option. As far as opt-outs, we've had a few questions recently about families or parents refusing testing. These are considered opt-outs. They are allowed, but they're highly discouraged by the NDE and also the SPCSA for various reasons that we won't get into here, because you could have a whole discussion about testing opt-outs. We don't have an opt-out form. The SPCSA doesn't, but you should use a form of your own for record keeping. We've provided a link here to a CCSD document that has a sample in Appendix F, and I do not recommend you share this opt-out option with all families and parents. So don't email the entire school, don't email all the families at a school and say, look, opt-outs are available, here's a form, because then you probably will get a lot of requests, which could affect your participation rate and lead to consequences in the future under the star rating system. So you should really only provide this kind of form when you've exhausted all other options and the family just doesn't want their student to assess. So if you do run into these situations, you should mark these students as OTH or other in the reason not tested code in the DRC system. And just note that's to be able to mark these reason not tested codes, students must be in test sessions. So you can make dummy test sessions. I've seen schools do this where they call the dummy test sessions something like opt-outs. They put all the opt-outs into those test sessions, and then they're able to mark those codes as other. There are other situations where you might need to mark students that did not participate for whatever reason. There are students that have withdrawn. They're no longer with you. Maybe they took 2 parts of the Smarter assessment, but took the ELA parts, but not the math. Under the math parts, you can mark those students as not enrolled in their reason not tested code. Again, to be able to mark those codes, you have to put them in dummy test sessions. You could use something like withdrawn. And then the last, probably much rarer thing that happens is there's students in the SBAC roster, but they take the NAA, the alternate assessment instead. You can mark those students as NA in the Smarter roster. And again, they have to be in test sessions. If you do all these type things, you will correctly code these students for NDE's participation rate calculations. For example, the students coded as other still count in participation calculations, but the students that are not enrolled or the NAA students, they are excluded from participation calculations because they're not, it's the students are no longer with you, or they're actually in the NA roster instead, and they should be participation should be calculated there. A few notes on designated supports and accommodations, because we've received a bunch of questions around this as well. The DRC has a UAAG, or Usability, Accessibility, and Accommodations Guide. It is very useful in explaining the different types of supports and accommodations available and how they are, how they're used in the testing system, how they're available, what schools need to do beforehand, that type of thing. It's available on the DRC Insight system under General Information Documents. We can share a copy of that post-meeting as well. Students do need to have an accommodation in place in their IEP at least 30 days before testing. So you can't just give a student like a text-to-speech accommodation today and then test them tomorrow. And then there's a reminder that students should be familiar with, I'm sure you all know this, but students should be familiar with an accommodation before it's put into use, especially in a high stakes test like Smarter. If they're not familiar with it, that can affect their performance on the assessment. And if you have specific designated support or accommodations questions, feel free to contact us and we can try to figure out the answer for you. Moving on specifically to high school science, we've have had some questions about this, about who's in the roster. NDE DRC preloaded all 9th graders, and additionally, they put in 10th graders who did not test last year per their records, which may or may not be, their pre-IDs are a little bit sketchy sometimes, so please check your assessment records or contact us if you need help if you're not sure if a student should test. We can try to look up student assessment results from last year and see if they did test somewhere else, or we can ask the NDE. As a reminder, under this high school science, all high school students need to test by the end of 10th grade. So they can test in either 9th grade or 10th grade. Schools can choose which grade to test. And usually schools choose a year based on the time or on the year that they offer the curriculum related to the test. So life sciences, you may teach that in 9th or 10th grade. Usually they give the test or choose to take the test, choose to give the test to students at the end of the grade where they saw that material. If you do want to transition from one year to another, I know one of our schools did this year, you will have to test both grades in a year. So for example, if you test 9th grade and want to move to 10th grade, you have to test both years so that you can get all the students tested that you need to. Moving on to ACT. If there are any issues, always you can contact the ACT support desk. There's some note about graduation requirements there that we've already gone over. And as far as we've had some questions about when are results going to be available, we've heard that some students at some schools have already gotten their results mailed to them or available online. And we were asked, when are schools going to get results? Those should be available shortly per the report schedule. It says that the high school reports should be coming 5 to 8 weeks following receipt of the test responses. So that was about March 1st, I believe, the state test day. So that 5 to 8 week, we're within that 5 to 8 week window. If there are makeup tests, etc., that could push that out a little bit. So you should be seeing that soon, I would imagine. And then, as usual, the NDE does it ACT data validation, in DVSL that will clean up those data. They'll do that in late June or early July. We will work with high schools or notify high schools once that is open, and we're happy to go over the details at that time. Just a couple notes on other assessments beyond the typical state required assessments. There's the civics exam that still must be administered. 12th graders have to take that to meet graduation requirements. And then the end of course assessments, we've had a few questions about this. Are they happening or not? Per the NDE, they're not going to be administered for this school year. And I think this is the last point on assessments. There are these NSPF special requests. We've had a few questions about this, so I'll go into a little bit more detail here. But these special requests are generally for students in extreme circumstances that cannot participate in a state assessment. And if a request is approved, that means the student is excluded from state assessment results in the NSPF in terms of participation. So let's say a student is really sick and they cannot test during the entire window. If it's approved, that's a request, then they won't count against you in terms of participation rates, which can affect your NSPF rating down the line. Please contact us if you think you might have a request to submit. And generally, these shouldn't be submitted until the end of the test window per the NDE. We did have a question recently about homebound students, where it's sort of a gray area under this request, and it's it's gray because it's due to COVID. The NDE hasn't really considered this, but a student may be homebound due to a medical condition where they can't come in maybe they're immunocompromised, as an example, and the family will not let someone into the residence to test. We've been advised that you can submit a request, but the NDE is still discussing these types of situations, so they may or may not be approved, but contact us if you have students in that situation. All right, that is assessments. Let's move quickly to accountability. Hopefully you've all seen this already. We're moving into the Nevada report card data collections. Phase 1, that always happens about this time of year. Late March, due late April. So this year it will be due Friday, April 29. This year we're using a Microsoft Forms survey. There's a link there. It is embedded within an Epicenter certification task. Basically, that Epicenter task says, instructions, please go to the survey, submit your data, and once you're done, come back and say, yes, I've submitted these data, and then you submit the Epicenter task. So this allows us to move away from trading Excel files back and forth over Bighorn, which was better last year, but it was still a little bit messy. We did provide an Excel file, a working file, if you do want to have your data ready before entering it into the survey. And here's what the phase 1 data collections include. If you've done this in the past, you're pretty familiar with this, but there's a technology survey about the number of computers, etc. Teacher attendance, where it's teacher days present and absent. Paraprofessionals, related to the number of those. Parent-teacher conference participation rate, that's only for elementary schools, but optional for middle and high. Then there's student-teacher ratio data. So this year we're collecting teacher accounts by grade. This again is required for elementary, optional for middle, and not applicable for high schools. In the survey, we did make the student counts optional. If you want to enter them, you can, but if you don't want to enter them, you can note that in the survey and we will pull it for you instead. Then there's the average class size, number 6, math, English, science, social studies. That requires the number of classes in those areas and also student counts in those classes. It's for middle and high schools, elementary not applicable. There's the average daily attendance, which we have made optional in the survey. Again, you can enter it if you like, but you can also say, no, I would like the SPCSA to pull that. And then CTE average daily attendance only for high schools with CTE, and again, it's optional. We can pull it from IC unless you indicate otherwise. With all of this, we're trying to streamline it, make it a little bit easier for you, understanding that if we pull the data, you may still want to see the results of that and make sure it all looks okay. So at some point in the future, we'll figure out a way to share all of the calculations with you. For example, maybe we'll say your average math class size is 25 students, English is 30, so that you can make sure that those numbers look realistic. Average daily attendance, that it's 99%. Does that look right to you? So we'll share that at some point before it all gets finalized. The title of this slide is obviously incorrect here, but this is related to CTE work-based learning and industry recognized credentials, data collection only applicable to high schools with these programs. We emailed high schools earlier in April. It'll be due in July, so there's a bunch of time on this. If they do apply to you, you can upload it to Bighorn. There are some notes about what this applies to. Work-based learning is only for schools with the state-approved work-based learning program. I believe we only have about 3, 4, 5 schools with those. And then industry recognized credentials, that's high schools that have students that receive these approved industry recognized credentials. If they don't apply to you, please reply to that email that we sent, just letting us know, and we will no longer email you about that. All right, trying to tie up quickly here about the NSPF. What do we know so far? So we've told you this previously. NDE was looking at submitting an addendum to U.S. Department of Education. They did do that. The NDE took public comment from a survey that we previously shared with all of you. Thank you for providing feedback. Unfortunately, I don't believe anything is being changed based on that feedback. So the NDE is moving forward with what they proposed and what they took public comment on. So they're going to move long-term goals forward 2 years for achievement and grad rates. They're not going to count waived accountability years as years that a school is in an improvement area like CSI, TSI, ATSI. And then probably the one that you're most concerned about, they are proposing to calculate NSPF index scores, but not assign star ratings. They did say they were looking into generating NSPF reports and modifying them so that it possibly shows the index score and just not a star rating. As far as some more details, we did get these very recently from NDE about what they're planning to do with certain portions of the NSPF. So for growth, that is for elementary, middle schools. As you know, growth calculations require matching student data between 2 assessment years. So a student needs to have assessment data from 1 year, and the same student needs to have assessment data from another year, and then you can calculate growth between those. So the NDE has chosen to calculate growth using assessment data from last year, and then also assessment data that will be coming from this year. For school designations, they are changing CSI definition. They are making it more, they're narrowing it. So now CSI schools will only be the Title I schools in the lowest 5th percentile of NSPF score, and also high schools with less than 67% grad rate. Before, you could get into CSI if you were a 1-star school, or if you were a Title I, if you were a non-Title I school in the lowest 5th percentile. So they narrow it, so hopefully that helps. I think they are possibly going to exit the schools that have a 1-star rating that are CSI. We're still waiting on that. TSI, this is the consistently underperforming student groups. Consistently underperforming, their definition is multiple years of data, consistently underperforming. They are saying they're going to use 2018-19 data and 21-22 data. So for example, they'll look at a student group math proficiency from 18-19 and then also 21-22. And then if those proficiency rates don't meet certain targets, the group may be labeled underperforming. As far as assessment participation, we already talked about this. Warnings and penalties will be reset for this NSPF. Schools will receive a warning if they don't meet participation, and then point penalties will be calculated starting next year. And then finally, chronic absenteeism wasn't reported under the NSPF last year, so there will not be a 10% improvement in chronic absenteeism point. Well, that sentence does not make much sense. We'll fix that. Usually there's you can get a point, elementary and middle, and I think half a point high schools if you improve your chronic absenteeism rate 10% over the prior year. So because there were no rates last year, there's no way to calculate that, so they're not going to award those points. That brings us to the end. There's our contact information. And thank you for joining us. We're happy to take any questions. I know we scheduled 30 minutes, so feel free to drop off if you have to, but we'll hang on the line here for any specific questions. Thank you. And maybe something to consider here. We typically have these meetings kind of later in the week, Wednesday or Thursday around 3:30. We do get a lot of responses, but then we don't always get a lot of people joining the meeting. So I'm wondering if there is a problem with the time or the day that we might be using. And if anyone has any comments on that, we'd be happy to hear that and possibly modify our date and time for the future. All right, well, seeing no questions in the chat, thank you for joining us for our April meeting. We'll get the recording link, and we'll also convert this presentation to a PDF and send it out likely tomorrow. So feel free to forward it to anyone that needs to see it. And we will talk to you next month more formally in this venue, and feel free to email us in the meantime about anything else. Thank you.